The summer of 1212, a year that is not taught in most Western schools, a year that does not appear in most popular histories of the Crusades, a year in which, depending on which chronicle you read, between 10,000 and 30,000 people, most of them children and young adolescents, walked out of their villages in France and the Rhineland and began marching south. They were carrying wooden crosses. Some had crosses sewn onto their tunics, rough-cut fabric, hand-stitched by mothers who either could not stop them or chose not to. They were singing hymns. They believed, because they had been told by the system that governed every aspect of their spiritual lives, that God had chosen them to recover Jerusalem. Not the knights, not the kings, them, the pure, the innocent, the young. The sea, they had been told, would part for them. To understand why 12-year-old children believed this, you have to understand what the Crusades had done to European theology by 1212. 4 major crusades had been launched. The first, in 1099, had taken Jerusalem and celebrated by massacring its Muslim and Jewish inhabitants in a slaughter so thorough that contemporary Christian chroniclers described blood running ankle-deep in the streets. The second crusade had failed. The third, Richard the Lionheart's, had failed to take the city back after Saladin reclaimed it. And the fourth, launched in 1204, authorized by Pope Innocent III, had never reached the Holy Land at all. It had sacked Constantinople, a Christian city, the capital of the Eastern Christian world, burned by crusaders who wore the cross on their tunics. The theological explanation for this century of failure was not that the strategy was flawed. It was not that sending armies across a continent to take a fortified city from a prepared defense was a logistical impossibility. The explanation preached from pulpits across Europe was simpler. God's crusaders had failed because they were sinful. The knights were too proud. The kings were too greedy. The armies were too corrupted by wealth and ambition. What God required was not military strength, it was purity. The Fourth Crusade had been launched to recover the Holy Sepulchre and had instead burned the Christian city of Constantinople. The institutional conclusion was not that the institutional system of crusading was broken, it was that the crusaders themselves were insufficiently innocent. The solution, preached to congregations of illiterate peasants across northern Europe, was to send the pure. In the spring of 1212, a shepherd boy in Cloy-sur-le-Loire, a village in the Loire Valley, a place so small it barely existed on the maps that mattered, announced that he had received a letter from Jesus Christ. He said his name was Stephen. He said God had chosen him to deliver the letter to the King of France. And he said that God wanted the children to go to Jerusalem. A girl named Marguerite, 12 years old, from a village near Cloy, heard the preaching. She had lost her father the previous winter. Her mother worked a plot of land that barely fed 3 children. Marguerite had been raised inside the same theology as Stephen, the same sermons, the same understanding that God required the pure and the innocent to finish what the knights had failed to complete. She took her younger brother by the hand, she sewed a cross onto her tunic, and she joined the column. Word of the movement reached Pope Innocent III in Rome, the most powerful man in Christendom, the man who had authorized the Fourth Crusade, the man who, with a single letter, could have ordered local bishops to stop the movement, to return the children to their families, to redirect the theological energy he had helped create. His documented response was 5 words. "These children put us to shame." He sent no letter ordering their return. He dispatched no mission to intercept them. He issued no papal bull declaring the movement unauthorized. The children of France and the Rhineland marched south with the implicit endorsement of the most powerful institution on earth, an endorsement delivered through silence. By July, the column stretched for miles, singing hymns, carrying crosses, walking south toward a sea they had been promised would part for them. The road, the physical from Cloy to Marseille, is roughly 400 miles. For an adult walking at a steady pace, it would take 3 weeks. For a column of children, the youngest perhaps 6 or 7, carried by older siblings, the oldest perhaps 15, it took most of the summer. The chronicles describe what the road did to them. Exhaustion first, then hunger. The column had no supply chain, no logistics, no adult organization. They depended on the charity of villages they passed, and the charity was inconsistent. Some villages fed them, some closed their gates, some watched from shuttered windows as the singing column passed and did nothing. The shoes wore out first. Contemporary accounts describe bare feet on summer roads, the kinds of roads that were meant for ox carts, not for children. The singing grew quieter as the column moved south. The hymns that had carried them out of their villages, songs about Jerusalem, about the sea parting, about God's favor for the innocent, became fewer and softer with each passing week. Simultaneously, and this is important because it shows the movement was not a single anomaly, but a pattern, a similar movement had begun in Cologne. Led by a youth named Nicholas, the German contingent attempted to cross the Alps toward Italy. The Alpine crossing in summer is difficult for prepared, equipped adults. For children and adolescents without supplies, it was catastrophic. Contemporary chronicles record deaths from exposure, starvation, and falls. The number who perished in the crossing is unknown and has never been documented with precision. The French contingent reached Marseille in late summer, the port city, the Mediterranean, the sea that Stephen of Cloyes had promised would part for them. It did not part. The children stood on the stone quay of Marseille's harbor and looked at the sea. It was blue, it was wide, it did not move. The theological promise that had carried them 400 miles on bleeding feet, the promise that God would open the waters for the pure, met the physical reality of the Mediterranean and found nothing miraculous waiting. What was waiting were merchants. Two men, contemporary chronicles name them Hugh Farius and William Porcus, offered the children free passage on their ships. They said they would take them to the Holy Land. They loaded an unknown number of children onto 7 vessels. If this is the first time you're hearing what actually happened to these children, and not the fairy tale version, this channel documents the stories behind the stories, the ones that didn't make it into the version you were taught. Subscribe. 2 of the 7 ships sank in a storm near Sardinia. The chronicles describe the event in a single sentence: the children drowned. The remaining 5 ships did not sail to the Holy Land. They sailed to Bougie and Alexandria, North Africa. The children were sold to slave traders. The merchants had never intended to take them to Jerusalem. The free passage was a commercial transaction in which the cargo was human and the cargo was 12 years old. Controlled. The restraint is the power. The records stop here, not because the story ended, because no one with the power to write it down considered their fate worth recording. The German contingent fared differently, and no better. Those who survived the Alpine crossing reached Genoa. The city refused to let them enter. Some turned back. Some made it to Rome, where, according to one chronicle, the Pope told them they were too young to crusade and released them from their vows. The kindness came after the journey had already killed an unknown number of them. In the years that followed 1212, the institutional church did not investigate the Children's Crusade. There was no papal inquiry, no commission, no formal accounting of the dead, no systematic effort to find the children sold into slavery in North Africa, no official document in the Vatican archive that addresses the question of how many children died, or where, or what happened to the ones who disappeared. In 1217, 5 years after the children marched, Pope Innocent III authorized the Fifth Crusade, a military expedition, adults, armies. The crusading system resumed its normal operations. The authorization documents contain no reference to 1212, no reference to the children, no reference to the sea that was supposed to part. The legend that survived was gentler than the documented reality. In the centuries that followed, the Children's Crusade became a parable. Innocent children, moved by faith, meeting a tragic but noble end. The story was retold as a fairy tale, shorn of the institutional theology that produced it, the institutional inaction that permitted it, the commercial exploitation that consumed it. Some scholars believe the legend of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, children following a stranger out of a town and never returning, is descended from the memory of 1212. The question that the legend erases, and that the documentary record forces back into the light, is not why did the children go? The children went because every authority in their world told them God wanted them to. The question is, why didn't anyone stop them? Pope Innocent III had the authority to stop the movement with a single letter. He chose not to. The King of France was advised by the University of Paris to send the children home. The enforcement was minimal. Local bishops, local lords, local authorities along the route of march watched the columns pass and did not intervene. The system that created the theology that produced the movement, the system that explained failed crusades as insufficient purity, allowed the logical consequence of its own teaching to march south and stood aside. This pattern, powerful institutions creating ideological conditions that mobilize vulnerable populations and then refusing responsibility for the consequences, did not end in 1212. It is documented in every century since. The specific mechanism changes. The theological language becomes political language. The wooden crosses become different symbols. But the structure is the same. The powerful create the conditions. The vulnerable act on them. The powerful do not intervene. And when the cost arrives, the powerful do not investigate. We do not know Marguerite's name. The composite character in this documentary is the closest we can come to giving a face to the thousands of children whose names were never recorded. We know they existed because the chronicles describe the column. We know they marched because the roads remember. We know some of them died at sea, in storms, in mountains. We know some of them were sold. We do not know what happened to most of them. The institutional system that sent them never asked. We don't know their names. We never will, but we can know what produced the world that sent them. If that matters to you, subscribe. New stories every week. This is how we got here.